Patricia, thank you. That was amazing. I feel so ready for the afternoon now. That was so much fun. And just to say, Patricia's website kind of flashed across the screen there at one stage, but Patricia and everybody who's contributing to the day are all featured on our website. You can see all of their biographies on the website. And there's so much to say. There's so many amazing people and there's so much to say. So we haven't been reading long bios of people out before each session, but do know that the information is there. And thank you again, Patricia, for that setup.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, and I should say also Patricia was at 3 of the 4 SoloSIRENs shows as well before she moved back to Barcelona. So she just missed the last one, unfortunately, just due to changes of location. So she's also SoloSIRENs audience. So what's happening now is people are slowly leaving the visible screen, and we will come back to one of these moments at the end of the day where we can all see each other again. But again, just to let people know, in case you're joining us, the reason that we go into everybody being an attendee rather than a panelist for the panels is it just tends to make a better visual and sound experience for most people. But we also wanted to have these few moments at different points in the day where we make sure to remind ourselves that there's people tuned into this webinar from all over the world today. So we're going to go into the next section, and I'm really excited about this. A really key and important part of the SoloSIRENs model, which we discussed this morning, was to have a researcher who would follow the entire festival and create an academic response to it. And because so much of the festival was an experiment for us, and we were trying to learn and trying to develop things, that was a really crucial role, and it was a very big role in terms of a big commitment of time and attention, and a lot of time. So I'm really grateful that Claire gave so much of her time and her presence, and you were such a lovely presence at the festival, Claire. So Claire saw all the shows, she saw all the post-show discussions, she had many discussions around the edges of the discussions with myself, with Jennifer Webster, with the collective, and she's written a response to all of that. So what's going to happen is Claire is going to read her paper, and then we're going to have a response to her paper from Melissa Sihra, who is the head of drama at Trinity College Dublin. And then we will also have a response from Jane Daly, who is the co-director of the Irish Theatre Institute. And then Claire, Melissa, and Jane will stay on the screen and will open into a wider panel on women's voices in theatre and society. So Claire is our bridge from the festival into the wider context. So Claire, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And can I just say it was a total pleasure being part of the festival. And really invigorating for my own research as well, which was really important. Also, to all of my non-performing academics who are here, Patricia's warm-up there is the best prep for giving a paper I've ever had. So thanks to Patricia. So this is my response to the festival. Sharing stories has always played an important role in women's lives, not only as an act of political resistance, but as a way of forming allies and of performing female friendship. In her book, Women Talk, which I have here, Jennifer Coates has found that talk is an important part of how women do friendship. Analysing 20 recordings of conversations among groups of female friends, Coates found that these women created distinctive and complex patterns when they talked. Rather than using the turn-taking model of a single floor, where one person holds the floor and speaks, and when they're finished, the listener takes the floor to respond, these women created what she describes as a collaborative floor. In a collaborative floor, the entire group is involved in creating conversation. The group takes priority over the individual, and the women's voices combine to construct the shared text. Once the collaborative floor has been established, the women then engage in a conversational jam session, which Coates defines as a spontaneous and improvisatory performance of talk for the women's own enjoyment. Some of the distinctive features of this kind of talk include the use of overlapping speech and interruptions. When they overlap, the women's voices chime together to reinforce a point. When they interrupt, it is to offer encouragement and support to the speaker. During these jam sessions, the group works hard to function as a unit, but still allows room for longer individual stories to be told. These longer stories are usually personal narratives, which Coates describes as solos within the jam session. When the group is functioning well, the other participants will respond with matching solos on a similar theme. According to Coates, disclosing personal information is an important element in close relationships, because self-disclosure normally produces self-disclosure from others, which promotes close bonds. So saying "me too" has always had an important function in women's friendships. Coates goes on to say that it is because turns and stories mirror each other, and because a balance is maintained between participants, that the vulnerability arising from self-disclosure can be contained safely. When I first heard the name of the SoloSIRENs Festival, I was instantly reminded of Coates's work. The structure of the festival reflected the dynamics of Coates's model of women's talk. 3 solos exploring personal experiences, followed by the jam session devised by the collective, the solos and the sirens. The solo shows began with Jenny MacDonald's Enthroned, an epic coming-of-age narrative that follows a path from experience in childhood to understanding in adulthood. This was followed by Jacinta Sheeran's Sweet About Me, which explored a young woman's sugar addiction through a series of solo and group therapy sessions. In Baggage, Nicole Rourke revealed the passions of the alter ego and a journey through love affairs and tango in Argentina. Each of these plays offered something personal, an insight into a process of self-discovery from coming of age to coming of rage. In the context of the festival, a dialogue emerged between these characters and their stories, creating a sequence of personal narratives that seemed to develop a common theme. Each play in the festival contained at its core a sense of disconnect from the body, the family, the world. Yet by telling these stories, new connections were created that linked childhood vulnerability in Enthroned to teenage shame in Sweet About Me, to adult rage in Baggage. Many of the threads that formed these connections came to culmination in the final piece of the quartet, Falling, which was devised by the SoloSIRENs collective. The 8 performers in Falling drew on their own personal stories to jam on topics created by prompts such as "I remember," "I believe," "I come from." Their stories were not only reflected in the experiences of other cast members, but were physically embodied and verbally recounted by them. One woman's story was told through another's mouth and performed by the entire group. One of the participants, Nelta, described how these connections came about. She said, "We could all see ourselves in each other's stories, even if not having experienced it, but having a similar sort of emotional reaction to something that happened. Despite the diversity of the group, they found common ground through their shared emotional experiences." Falling began with the performers sharing stories about their lives, prompted by the phrase, "I remember." One memory would prompt another memory, as the women listened and responded to each other's stories with one of their own. This moment stood out for me because it was an exchange I had witnessed repeatedly throughout the festival's Friday night panel discussions. When prompted for responses to the performances, audience members frequently shared memories from their own personal experience. One story triggered another. This had the effect of creating a reverberation between the stories presented on stage with real-life experiences of women in the audiences. A series of personal stories continually mirroring and echoing, reflecting and refracting each other's experiences. The impact of these performances was not only felt intellectually and emotionally by their audiences, but physically too. I've been talking here about connections that were forged through the act of storytelling, but we all know, and perhaps now more than ever, that the meeting of bodies in space plays a crucial role in establishing those bonds. Mirror neurons, which are neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe an action being performed, have an important function in this process. They were discovered by a team of Italian neuroscientists in the University of Parma in the 1990s. While they were setting up an experiment on the F5 area of the agranular frontal cortex of the macaque monkey, one of the researchers walked into the room, picked up a raisin, and ate it. As the monkey watched him, the team noticed that the same neuron fired in the monkey's brain as when the monkey ate a raisin himself. Similar networks of mirror neurons have been found in other species, and humans are believed to have a more highly evolved mirror system. As an audience member, you may become aware of mirror neurons when you see someone receiving a body blow on stage and you think, oh, I felt that. But they're actually firing unconsciously all the time. Our connected brains are continuously synchronizing with the actions we observe on stage. Of course, this neural connection is reflected in other organs of audiences' bodies too. Recent research has shown that heartbeats of audience members sync rhythmically while they watch a performance. This bodily connection between the audience and performers was brought into focus during the falling panel discussion, when one audience member, referring to a sequence during falling when the group's breathing was audible, said, "I was breathing with the group." The synchronization of breath, the neural mirroring, and the exchange of stories combine to create bonds between audiences and performers through connected brains and connected bodies, through the repeated meetings of the same women in the same space. These connections extended outwards from the festival event to the broader context of Irish theatre, both present and past. When Glasshouse Theatre staged their festivals of women's plays in the 1990s, under the ironic title, "There Are No Irish Women Playwrights," they sought to redress public ignorance of the female canon. 25 years later, the need for festivals of women's work hasn't gone away, but their purpose has evolved. So why does seeing a series of performances by women matter? This is why. It allowed the stories of these women to be explored from many angles. It allowed those stories to stand alone and to represent a kind of way of being in the world. But because it wasn't the only story being told, it wasn't the way of being in the world. The festival began with Jenny MacDonald's Enthroned, which opens with a description of the princess stories common throughout Western culture. She says, "And in one story, the story of the princess who knows she is a princess, it is decreed that that happens when she finds the prince. And that story is so often told that we get confused. We mistake that one story for the story." By including many voices and many perspectives, SoloSIRENs exploded the all too often tendency for tokenism that carries a reductive and unified vision of what womanhood is and can be. This explosion allowed women's stories to be told in all their variety and diversity, transforming the story of the woman into the stories of many women. Within this explosion, the individual stories of these women were not lost or subsumed by the group, but were incorporated with all of their individual nuances and anomalies, with care and respect. For many of you listening, this isn't anything new. This has always been our way. But for too long, our way has not been reflected by our theatres, and that is why this festival and others like it matter. Thank you.
Claire, thank you so much. So much food for thought in there, and I'm glad that we have some time and space now to unpack it. So I'm going to invite Melissa first to give some words in response, and then Jane after. Melissa's looking, I think, for the...
Oh. Hello there.
Unmute.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Great. Hello. Thank you so much, Jenny. And hello, everybody. It's a great joy to be here today. So thank you so much.
You are unmuted.
Am I unmuted now?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Hello, hi. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Claire, and thank you to everybody. It's great to see so many people here. Faces from the past, it's wonderful. And that workout was just beautiful. So every conference, everything should always have that kind of a thing. It's just perfect. But thank you, Claire. Your paper was brilliant. And it got me thinking in a bigger context, I suppose, than SoloSIRENs, about the ways in which women speak. And I was thinking about how women, and you so powerfully say this, how women often form allies in groups. Women who are amongst each other conduct conversations collaboratively. And since the beginning of second wave feminism, women have been associated with collaboration as a practice of shared communal expression. It's become a part of what a woman is, what being a woman is, expressing yourself as a woman and as a feminist. As Claire says, it's where the group takes priority over the individual. So it's that kind of sisterhood thing that is so central to this kind of a festival, this kind of work. It's where we witness the shared experiences of women's voices and the vitality of that. And we see this in the collective dynamic of women's theatre, groups, festivals, and feminist groups and symposia. It's a common denominator, that sense of coming together. We've seen that, we've heard today that women are reciprocal, and this is the ideal. In the ideal sense of this, women offer each other support and amplify one another and reiterate each other and reaffirm each other. And as Claire has made the point, women's groups often function together as a unit, and women mirror one another in each other's company, which is a great source of empowerment, agreeing, affirming, and asserting each other. And this is wonderful. The idea of breathing together as a group, very powerful. The powerful expression of a unity of shared breath and voice and thought and body. And I want to think about the breath and the voice and the thought when it's brought into other contexts for women. What happens when breath can become disjointed, or it becomes fractured or silenced or passive, or indeed internally policed, so that it becomes halted and not unified? And this, I was thinking about my own life and all our lives. So much of our jam sessions take place in meetings. They're every day, they happen all the time. Now they're on Zoom. And meetings, essentially, it's people coming together in a jam session. And I've noticed over 20 years, it's something I'm very passionate about, is observing how people speak in meetings and how people present themselves. And I see that women constantly reinforce each other's points and amplify each other in meetings. They offer support, and there are those key exchanges of listening and responding, of mirroring that we talked about earlier. And it's a performance. It's a performance of support, expression, care, love, respect. And it's an exchange and a contract that women do very well. So I wanted to ask and explore, I suppose, in bigger context, what happens to women's voices outside of women's only groups, or women-centric groups, or groups where other genders are allies of women? So I've noticed patterns that emerge, and it's something that I have talked about and thought about, and I wanted to bring it to us today. I've noticed often an internalized lack of confidence kicks in as a default for many women in mixed gender groups. I've noticed over 20 years that women often have to fight to be heard in mixed gender groups. That's a very obvious statement, but I think it's an important one that we shouldn't forget, that we do have to fight for our voice, even in terms of the volume of our voice. I notice how women frequently revert to ask for permission to speak in a mixed gender room. Can I just make a point? Can I just ask? They seek permission to ask a question or to contribute as a default. Essentially, this equates to women seeking permission to be in the room, consciously or unconsciously. I see that women often apologize before they make a point or frame their comment with an apology. Sorry, can I just say, sorry, can I just ask? This is all minimizing language. Women often come from this passive perspective or position in these jam session meetings. Do you mind if I ask? Or could I just say? In meetings, I've also heard over and over again women prefacing their point with, this might sound silly, or I know this is stupid, but, or I don't know if this is relevant, but. That's a key one. Taking away the relevancy and the validity of your point before you even make it. If we cut the word just from our vocabulary, we already become much stronger. Not, I just want to make a point, can I just say? Look at Kamala Harris this week. She's wonderful to watch her in her debates with her opponent. She says, I am speaking. I am speaking. And she takes her place, takes her position, and takes her space. And she owns it. And she has to do that. She has to verbally articulate that she is speaking, but she does it without apology. And that's the key, without any sense of a preface or a qualification for a point. Women do have to fight to be heard. I've had to fight to be heard my whole life. When I first started as a lecturer years ago, I was often the only woman in a male-dominated room. And I found that these would be men my age, not always older or senior, but my peers as well as some senior. And I found that I had to shout or I had to speak in very high volumes in order to be heard. And it was something that I internalized so much through doing that I brought it to my next job. And I found that I was shouting in meetings when I didn't need to, because people were beginning to listen to me or there was more women in the room. And I realized that my voice was really loud. And I realized it was because I had internalized that behavior for about 5 years. So it's the internal feeling is that women, and it's something I have to check myself, that I'm inherently as valid as the usually strong male voice or presence in the room. So I don't need to explain my point before I make it, or explain my position, or justify it, I suppose. We've internalized this secondary inferior status for millennia, and there is no need to qualify yourself. Instead of asking, can you make your point, simply make it, or ask your question or give your contribution. Take your stand and take your place. I see it with my female students as well as colleagues. Very often they'll apologize before they present their work, or try to explain it or minimize it, or say it's not finished. That's another thing, it's not ready. It's time to break the cycle of internalized inferiority and to realize that we can breathe out strong in any group, not just in the reciprocal safety of women-only groups or women-allied groups or women-centric contexts. This is where we become empowered, and then we must take it outside to every aspect of our lives. It is challenging, but it's habitual and can be changed. The more you do something, the easier it becomes. It is a practice like anything else. Train yourself not to use passive, minimizing language, and simply and clearly state your point without and assert your equal and valid presence. Jenny's speech this morning and the manifesto was very moving and asked us to consider our relationship as an individual to the wider community. And I think that's really important. Consider the power of our individual breath within the wider communities that we inhabit, breathing individually and together. Jenny talked about that our body parts are fixed for millennia, and I agree. And I think our speech patterns have been fixed for millennia too. So we need to be brave and rehearse some possibilities for change in how we speak and learn from each other. There's great joy to behold women supporting women. We need to bring this strength out beyond this so that we can breathe with individual strength in every and any group. bring the strength of positive affirmation that we express in days like this to all jam sessions, all Q&As, meetings, presentations, and every relationship and aspect of our life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you particularly for those very concrete actions that I think we can take away to start to consider and change the speech patterns as well. I'm going to pass over to Jane now for her response, and I think, Jane, you're going to be prompted to turn on your video and to be unmuted there.
They're both
there you are. Yeah.
On. Yep. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, look, I'm not an academic, so my response is going to be one very much as a frontline theatre worker with a lot of experience under my belt and a knowledge of having had the pleasure of working with Claire over a period of time in the Irish Theatre Institute. And I know how excited she was when she was asked to conduct this piece of research, and her paper is really very stimulating, I think is the word that I would use about it, because what she's managed to do there is to obviously observe the festival, listen, analyse, and look at something in a kind of theatrical context, and then turn it into a very large sociological and gender paper, which has made me think about the whole thing about being a woman in theatre, a woman working in theatre for 35 years, and what does it mean? And when she asks the question, you know, are events like this, festivals like this important? You would like to think they shouldn't have to happen. We don't have men's festivals. We don't have men only festivals. We have women's events. We have gay events. We have queer events. We don't have men's events. So I think the answer to that question is, as long as men don't have to do this, we have to keep at it. It reminded me of over 30 years ago in Dublin, there was a short-lived but very intense period in which women in the arts and entertainment sectors came together under the title of Fair Share, where we worked together to see if we could find ways in which fairness for women could be placed on the agenda. And it was short-lived, but what I learned from that period of my life is the value of what you call jamming, which is a new term to me. In our days, I suppose it was conversation. It was that sense of being with your like, being part of a particular tribe. And it had a feminist agenda, which was very prevalent at the time. But what emerged from that short, intense period as Fair Share were lifelong friendships and lifelong collaborations as women on personal levels and as professionals. And I think that when I think about something I was involved in over 30 years ago, and I see, Jenny, you and your tribe working together in this area at the moment, it makes me realize, on the one hand, that it's quite sad that we haven't maybe come further, but it reinforces the importance of events and gatherings like this, where we remind ourselves of what it is to be a woman in the world and what it takes. And I think it's really important to remember the work of people like Charabank Theatre Company, who worked in the 80s and early 90s. And it is that sense of women, a community of women who complement each other, who to support each other. Melissa referred to this, how they encourage each other, apply constructive criticism rather than tearing each other down. The rivalry isn't as prevalent as it might be found in other situations. And I also think of the work of the International Festival of Contemporary Arts, the City of Women in Ljubljana, that has been holding a festival since 1995, which is primarily around promoting and showcasing the work that is authored by women or is mainly led by women. And similarly, the WP Theatre in New York City, formerly the Women's Project, which is a theatre organization that ensures that the future is female. And these international connections, it makes me think that the opportunity for you and your colleagues and old fossils and dinosaurs like me, who thought they were at the barricades in the 80s and had it all sorted, realized that it's time for a lot of us to dust down the siren in us and to support initiatives like yours. And I'd really like to just congratulate Claire on her paper, and to finally say that the whole concept of the kind of mirroring and sitting in a theatre together, and we can breathe together, we can laugh together, we can respond together. Yet theatre is such a subjective art form that there's almost like it's kind of oxymoronic in some strange way that you can be part of this living organism in a theatre, yet you come out at the end and you have two totally diverse reactions or opinions on what you've just seen. And such is the beauty of theatre. And thank you for inviting me to participate. It's been really stimulating, as I said.
Jane, thank you so much, and thank you for participating and for your support. It's wonderful to hear your experiences, and I think, yes, it's frustrating sometimes to realize people have been fighting some of these fights for a very long time, but I do think people in my generation we have been supported by your work and by the work that you've always done, and that's what I hope to also offer to generations coming after me. So I would now like to open the discussion. I'm going to invite Sarah Fitzgibbon to